Hi, this is Lou with some advice to people who want to get started in game design, and that is design a card game, not some other kind of game. Now, I don't mean a game that uses a standard deck of cards. I mean a game that uses specialty cards that you design. But in card games, typically, there are fewer choices for players to make because they have a set of cards and all they can do is something involved with the cards. There may be a few other things, but mainly they're figuring out from a limited set of choices. That simplifies the game a lot. Moreover, you can put a lot of the rules on the cards. So the players don't have to learn the rules until they get a card that is frequently an exception to the rules, the very simple rules that the player has learned to start with, and then they read what the rule is for the exception, and then they can deal with it. And that also simplifies the game. Furthermore, my observation at college game clubs, and there aren't that many non-college game clubs around to watch, but I've watched several college game clubs, and I've walked around the room at big meetings. There might be 10 games being played, and by far the majority are card games, not collectible card games. I'm not counting that. And of course, collectible card games are a much bigger category than board games or RPGs altogether. But it's just the fact that you walk around the room and most of the games are primarily card games. This is not something that anybody deliberately did, it just happens. So the opposite of that, unfortunately, is it's not that easy to sell a card game to a publisher, but it's relatively easy to produce a card game yourself and sell it. Now, card games generally don't do all that well on Kickstarter, but sometimes they do, and sometimes it's ridiculous, like with Exploding Kittens, which is an awful game, not much of a game at all, but had the advantage of the art of the Oatman. It's in fact a case on Kickstarter, if you have really good art, you can sell a card game even though the card game isn't worth a spit. But it'll be relatively easy to produce that card game, whereas with a board game, it'll be more difficult. Now, we could say in an aside, what about RPGs? Well, certainly you can make up a role-playing game if you write, and you can write 100 pages or 200 pages or however much you want to write, and you might be able to sell it or you might not. So that's the alternative to a card game. Unfortunately, unless you're a role-playing gamer, and unless you have people willing to test your role-playing game, which is not that easy to arrange, then the role-playing game is not as good an avenue for first-time design as card games are. Thanks for listening.